Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is Watermelon Lime Zinger, one of my favorites, but also a very summery tea from Celestial Seasonings. Doing that because I'm doing my September 2020 wrap-up, which is technically summer mostly, right? Even though we think of it as autumn. Yeah. I like it all year long. But anyway, so yeah, the wrap-up. It was an interesting month. I had a pretty good reading month. I finished 5 books in total, but I was also reading a lot of The Count of Monte Cristo. I got about a quarter through with it, and I still like it. I got a little bit stuck. You ever get into like a chapter that you're just not into, and so you feel a little bit stuck? But I'm gonna go back to it because I know that how much I've enjoyed it so far means that it's gonna get good again. I think, and yeah, there's a couple of things that I started and didn't quite finish, but I finished 5 books, so we're going to mostly talk about that. Well, one of them I'm not going to talk about that much, which is Riviera Gold by Laurie R. King, which I covered in Tea and Mystery, so we're good with that. But I noticed, which is interesting, that everyone I finished this month of September, all 5 books I finished were written by female authors, which was kind of interesting because one of the books I read was about 5 female writers. It was not planned that way, but it's just that's how it happened. And I've been working on the Fall Into Reading Challenge, and yeah, I didn't even mark this. I didn't do any markings on Instagram. I just kind of kept it in my head. I doubled up on a lot of the themes. I went for the smaller challenge because I didn't want to be too ambitious, and so I might go along a little bit and show you which has been ticked off and which I still need to work on. A little disappointing for me is that I didn't get very far in ShakeTube. I really wanted to read a lot more Shakespeare, and actually complete Shakespeare while I was in the month of September. And I did start the Hamlet graphic novel, which would have covered a couple of those categories. But I didn't get as far as I thought I was going to get. I have read Hamlet before, but still. I don't know. And I did watch a lot of the ShakeTube videos by the ShakeTube hosts, people. Very good, very excellent ones. Happy to see Rainey in there as well. But I felt like I was a little bit of a failure. I was reading, what was it, Much Ado About Nothing, and was enjoying it. I had the little book, I had like these ones, and this very one. And I was reading it on the subway, and this woman was coming in when I was coming back from work, and this woman was coming in, and she, was asking for people for money. She had a mask on, which was actually good, because not everyone does. And I didn't give her money, but then later on she goes to me and she sees me reading this, and she's like, "Is that a Bible?" And I was like, "Oh, no, it's Shakespeare." Because it could have been. I do read the Bible. And I specifically remember reading one of the more rough passages of the Book of Judges on the subway one time, and not exclaiming as I would have at home. But then she started talking about school and learning Shakespeare in school and what her teacher said, whatever, and I was just like, that is so weird how you could just get into a conversation with anyone from what you're reading sometimes. But she still didn't get any money from me. But she didn't ask again. So yeah, I would like to. I feel like I've not been reading enough Shakespeare in my life recently. We'll have to rectify that in some way or another. Let's talk about the books I read. And I noticed that 3 of the books I finished were also library books, so we're going back into that problem, even though it's a good thing that I have access again to library books, because I maybe won't spend as much money on new books that I've been doing. But still. This was Square Haunting, 5 Writers in London Between the Wars by Francesca Wade, and I quite enjoyed this. I think I gave it about 4 stars. I don't know, stars, what does it mean? So we'll talk about the people that are covered here. Mecklenburg, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Square in Bloomsbury, London, is the square that we're talking about here, mostly in the 1920s. Some of them lived before and after a little bit too, but that was the main time. And so we have here, and all of them kind of knew each other at some point, or at least one of them knew the other one, so they're slightly connected. Modernist poet HD, I think it was Hilda Doolittle. who I knew nothing about. I think she had a little bit of a revival years later. Her life was interesting enough. It was a little too much. She and the writers that she was close to, and whoever she was close to, well, they seemed mostly people who were writers, all seemed to write autobiographical kind of books about each other later on. It was a bit much. I'm not saying you can't do it, but it was just like, goodness, people, you all need therapy, which was funny because she did see a therapist. She saw the most famous therapist ever. The original, what was it, the OG, anyway. I'm not gonna get into that, I'm too old for that. But anyway, she did. And so, but she needed more therapy. She needed group therapy. But anyway, detective novelist Dorothy L Sayers, who I have a biography of hers. Do I? I think I do. I'm looking over toward a lot of my writer biographies. I feel like I do, but maybe I'm just imagining it. Either way, I shall have to read a book. I'm trying to read more of the Lord Peter Wimsey first, because even here they gave away a few plot points, but not actual spoilers. But I'm at the point where I'm okay with that, with that, because I did my first book that I didn't finish, but I will get back to of her books was Gaudy Night, which was a bit of a giveaway of certain things. So whatever, but like a lot of detective novelists that I am into, she made her money, she made her name through her detective novels, like Agatha Christie did, and Arthur Conan Doyle did. But sometimes she just got, she was not wanting to just focus on maybe one particular detective or whatever, and maybe wanted to do other things. She started, I think it was a little bit later in life, translating Dante, which, I can't even translate my thoughts in the morning. So I'm, it's pretty, some of these people and their translating abilities, it's like, wow. But anyway, I guess I'm not very scholarly, but yeah, I mean, I think she still understands that her Lord Peter Wimsey books were important. But anyway, so it talks about her time there and before and after. Classicist Jane Harrison, another translator, oh my goodness. She was involved in like a lot of Greek and Roman stuff earlier on, like in the Victorian years, where it was really hard to be a female scholar or academic. And yet she did so. And then later on, like nearer to her Mecklenburg Square years, which were her last years, she started learning Russian and translating Russian novels. Like, goodness sakes, wow. And then and I never heard of her, so I'm glad I read about her now. Economic historian Eileen Power, who I knew nothing about either, and I liked her because she was another one who was full of surprises. In that people would expect to meet this woman and see like a blue stocking, very, certain look. And sometimes she would dress quite trendy and fashionable, 20s-ish or whatever. And I like that. I like that, not everyone can be put in a box. And, I don't know if you've ever heard of this one, author and publisher Virginia Woolf. Anyone? So, I mean, I've already known quite a lot about Virginia Woolf. I think somehow I've read bits of her biographies over the years, although I haven't sat and read an entire, have I? Biography of her? I don't know. I don't think so. So maybe it's time. But it was, in terms of this time in London mostly, it was good. It was good. It was a good book. So yeah, in an era when women's freedoms were fast expanding, they each sought a space where they could live, love, and above all, work independently. And you could see it's the whole concept of a room of one's own, being able to have that luxury, being able to live in a time where that was at all possible. Everybody here dealt with something, like a lot of them had to deal with World War One and what happened at that point and how it affected their work or whatever, or different revolutions. They're just different changes in life. And so yeah, if this sounds at all interesting to you, I think it's worth a read. What else? Okay, so that actually would cover that was a crazy face I just had there. Nonfiction and published in 2020. So that's already the first two blocks, because it was published in 2020. But let's see. what else do we have here? Moving on to what I thought was gonna be earlier written, but this was actually published in the 90s. This was actually the writer's very last book, and this is Dorothy West's The Wedding. So I think I went into this expecting something different, but I wasn't disappointed. It took place mostly in the 1950s in Martha's Vineyard. I want to say Martha Stewart. Martha's Vineyard, and it was like slightly well-to-do persons of the black communities, and who usually had another home in New York, Boston, etc. And they would summer in Martha's Vineyard, which is great. I've never been to Martha's Vineyard, but I've heard lovely things about it. It is one of my minor travel goals. But anyway, so at this point, man, names have escaped me entirely. Shelby. Okay, Shelby Coles. She is the daughter of a doctor, very well-to-do doctor, and she is basically mixed. Her family has been over the years black and white, and you do learn about the family since around the time of the Civil War till now, which is the 50s, and so I think she's kind of I guess they call it passing, where you could, if you really wanted to, you could pass as white. But she's marrying a white man. And so some people are not crazy about that idea, and some people are, whatever. Some people very much don't want her to, and they're trying to kind of sabotage it. It's hard to explain. But you think that it's just going to be all about the wedding and everything behind it, but it really does go into the family histories and how all her recent ancestors came to the point that they are at this moment, and all the problems that they had to overcome, and the prejudices and all any kind of issue, and at this point, so different race relations, and not just between black and white persons, also between people who are black but of different colors or whatever. So it was a good perspective that I've read about, but not maybe enough. So it was kind of a bit of a learning experience for me, a little bit of a historical fiction, because it was going to a slightly past time, so I could tick off historical fiction here, and I could also tick off author of color. I want to read the other book I have from Dorothy West called, I think it's The Living is Easy. Yeah, I think so. So, yeah. So I have to say, it was a little sadder than I expected. I don't want to tell you what happens, but for me, it wasn't the same as like The Elegance of the Hedgehog. I don't know if you ever heard of this book, which is one of my favorite books, but it had a kind of sadness in it that reminded me of that. And that's really hard for me to explain without giving away a complete spoiler. But a lot of the characters aren't completely likable, although some have really, have been just really hardworking and tried to, either better themselves or especially the next generation. So when I say better, having a better life, not that they weren't, good people, but like their circumstances were just rough, and so yes, it's a fascinating, unforgettable tale, according to People magazine. I quite agree. I have been thinking a lot about what happened in this book I finished this a few weeks ago, and I'm still thinking about it. So there it is. Okay, so a slight change. So I finally read, because I read The Secret Garden in May, I think it was, and this is A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which I know is another just like The Secret Garden. There are certain issues with colonialism that some people might have a difficult time reading about, but I mean, it was part of the time, I guess. And I thoroughly enjoyed this story. To me, it is kind of, in its own way, like the British version of Anne of Green Gables. it's not exactly, but it is similar in a lot of ways. You know, kind of the main character's imagination getting her through difficulties and struggles of an orphan, just in a different circumstance and a different outcome. So the main character, whose name is Sarah Crew, I had to remember. I'm pretty sure the name Sarah means princess. I don't think they addressed that in the book, but I'm pretty sure the author, Frances Hodgson Burnett, must have had that in mind. So it's a pretty well-known story. It was, I think, written in serialization in the 1800s, but it was published afterwards, so I didn't save it for October. And I read it pretty quickly, actually. It ticks off, for me, it ticks off middle grade. So, yeah, it was an easy read for me, but still interesting enough. So Sarah Crew comes from her mother has died when she was younger. Her father loved her very much, but they grew up in India, or she grew up in India, and her father's taking her to a school in London to, just get her education. That's what they did at that time. And he was really well to do, so she basically is kind of like a princess. You know what I mean? Like but she's not high and mighty. She's actually very kind and looks after the people. But then certain circumstances happen where, certain reversals where suddenly she's not treated as a princess at all whatsoever, and it's like, how will she get through this, and will she get through this, and what happened? So that's the story. It's a pretty well-known story, so I don't think I really need to say much more about it. I liked it. I liked her. I thought she was a pretty good role model in general. Like she was kind and generous in ways that I probably wouldn't even be sometimes when, in times of hunger or whatever. Although I'd like to think that I would be. So it was very entertaining. And sometimes as a character she was almost perfect. If you know what I mean. Like one time she goes on, she explains to someone how angry she gets when someone interrupts her when she's reading. And that's like the most negative thing they could say about her, and that was thoroughly relatable. But because I remember I was reading some reviews of it, I think on Goodreads, and someone called her a Mary Sue, and I could see what they mean by that, but I'm like, this was written years ago, and it's still a good story. I enjoyed it. That's the main thing, right? I enjoyed it. Okay, so last but not least, I read The Lions of Fifth Avenue by Fiona Davis. This is my first Fiona Davis. Apparently, when I mentioned this book on Instagram, a few people had said, oh yeah, I really like her, this book and that book, whatever. And I didn't realize she had other books that I could maybe look into. So I wouldn't say this is my favorite book of all time, but it was a pretty good, it technically could be considered a mystery. But I'm not going to cover it for Teen Mystery just because I don't have time right now. I'm focusing on Victober now. But it's also one of those books, there's a word for it, but it's like a dual time thing where every couple chapters you go to a different time period. Sometimes that annoys me because you may get more attached to one character than another. And in this case, I got more attached to the modern character, which, considering this could be considered a historical novel because they focus on the lives of two different women, and who are made up, by the way. One is Laura Lyons, who at her present time is like 1913, 1914. Her family, this is based on things that had happened, but not, it's still fictionalized. So her family lives in an apartment in the New York Public Library, the main public library that, if you see any pictures of it, it's the one with the two lions, Patience and Fortitude. And but they had different names back then, apparently, which I want to look up because I didn't know that. And so she lives there with her husband, who is working on his novel, and her two kids, and she's trying to get her own education in Columbia. And so it's that whole struggle between, wanting your own path in life, but, being a woman, which actually was very relatable to square haunting in some ways. Well, at least it made me think that way. And I liked it. I liked the idea of it, but it was that portion of the story was a little bit sad. I'm not gonna say what happens, but it was pretty sad. And then you go into 1993, which is like the present day, but it can now also be considered historical fiction, I guess, because it's 27 years ago, and that really gets to me because my very first job was in 1993. So, and it was really close to where this library is, so that's weird for me. But the main character there is, I forgot her name. I just finished this last night. Sadie Donovan, and she is my age, actually. When I say she's my age, she is the age I am now, but in 1993. So she wasn't a teenager in 1993. And she's now working at the New York Public Library, and in the same building. And she doesn't live there, but she is the granddaughter of Laura Lyons. And some rare books and materials go missing, including a Virginia Woolf, by the way, which is another connection. And then they go back to Laura Lyons' story, and also some rare books go missing. And there's a whole, is it connected? What is going on? How can someone do this? Like, how are they getting in to do this? And, working with the police on that, and the different families and their dynamics and everything. So it was a pretty good adventure in some ways, like very literary. There was one stint where there was a trip to London. So I was like, yay, for me, because I love reading about New York, but I also love it when London makes its appearance. And so yeah, it was a good, I wouldn't call it my favorite read of the year. It had a lot of sad bits, and the ending kind of, I don't want to say what the ending was, but yeah, it was a moment where it was like, oh yeah, really? But still, I mean, it was plausible, but still. But it was good. Like, if you like to read anything that's slightly like a mystery, but not like a super detective story, and dual timeline type of story, if you like to read about kind of like, the struggles of writers and I guess feminism, that sort of thing, it's a pretty good book. Very New York. I only finished it last night, so it's like, it's hard to, not everything was sinking in, but I really wanted to finish it because I'm filming this in the first day of October. I really wanted to finish it before midnight so that I could have it done and start with my Victorian books. And I finished it 4 minutes before midnight. So that was pretty good for me. So yeah, that was it. That would also count as historical fiction, and I think published in 2020, but I mean, I already had that covered. I guess it could also be counted as a mystery. So was Rivera Gold, but I kind of put that in thriller. I know thriller horror, but it was technically a thriller, so I just stuck that in there. So I still have contemporary, unless you can count 1993 as contemporary. I don't know when I'm going to get that in. That's one of the hardest ones for me to figure out. Romance, I'm reading books that are probably going to be considered romance. Science fiction, I started something, but I don't know if I'm going to finish it by the end of November. Okay. And I already mentioned graphic novel and young adult. Fantasy, I'm not so sure because I didn't get to Watership Down. I'm not going to have time for that. Classic, I will definitely read. I'm reading so many classics right now. So anyway, I thought I was going to make this short, but we're getting closer to 25 minutes because that's how we roll here in Tea-land. So I hope you've enjoyed. Let me know if you read any of these books, what you thought of them, if you're doing any of these challenges like Fall into Reading, and if you did Shake Tube, whatever, what do you think, etc. If you like talking about these things, please subscribe. And yeah, that's it. So this is Catherine and Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely October, going into October now. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day. Goodbye.